Hi, welcome to Case Conceptualization Part 2. This is when I do an actual case conceptualization verbally. We're going to do Zula's case. Remember that this is an oral example, not a written example. So when you write your case conceptualization, you're going to do it in paragraph form, and you're going to have much more detail than what I'm actually doing verbally with you. Okay, this is just an example. Before you watch this video, if you haven't done it already, pause and take a moment to read Zula's case so that you'll understand what I'm referencing when I'm discussing her case. So before you begin completing an actual case conceptualization, you need to do a couple of things. You have a theory base, right? You need to determine the main concepts of the theory. Write them down. Those are the things that you need to cover in your conceptualization. And you need to have a clear understanding of the vocabulary and those concepts for your theory. You have to know what they mean. Now, for the midterm and the final, you're going to be required to have references. It is extremely important for you to find these references well before the midterm and the final exams so that you're not scrambling. Many of these references you might have to get through interlibrary alone, which could take up to 2 weeks. Some of these things might be videos that you actually go to campus and check out and take a look at, right? So it's really important that you find resources. Now, professional resources like peer-reviewed journal articles, books, or videos from the theorists, books directly from the theorists, no online articles or blogs or textbooks. This is a professional paper, okay? Now, for the discussions, you're going to use the textbook and the video lectures, and that's fine. But for your midterm and final, you're going to be required to find resources. Once you list those main concepts of theory, then you need to find resources that explain those concepts. That is going to help you. The quality of resources, the quality of those references that you use, and the fact that you read them are what's going to make a huge difference in how well you do in your midterm and final exam. So please take the time to get the references ahead of time. Meet with the reference librarians. Let them help you find some resources. Okay? All right. So let's move on to Zula. So we're going to do this case the exact way that was listed in the other video and is also on your case conceptualization forms. Information form, right? I'm going to use an attachment framework. Attachment is my theory base, so I'm going to use that framework for this case. And you need to be very clear, particularly in your midterm and your final, what theory base you're using up front. Okay. So the descriptive data for Zula is that she's a 19-year-old white female of low socioeconomic status, and she's a mother of a young child. Her relevant history, and remember, this is short. Her relevant history is that she has a background of, and I'm doing this from an attachment base, she has a background of moving between family members and has had disrupted relationships. Environmental. She lives alone. She has a lack of a support system, and again, low socioeconomic status. Her personality dynamics and client strengths. She's independent. She loves her baby. She has goals and she is motivated. Now, it would be really easy for me to say negative things about Zula or any client when I'm discussing the personality dynamics. And sometimes students have a hard time finding client strengths. Every client has strengths. That's why we use the wellness model. We use those client strengths to help our clients. So watch your biases, particularly in these type of sections, to make sure that what you're saying is objective and positive for the client. The second part of this would be Zula's issue. Again, 1 or 2 sentences, right, from the client's point of view. So I would say that the presenting problem is that, number 1, the doctor referred her to counseling and she wants to have the doctor leave her alone, right? Zula wants to go to school and she's not sure she wants to be a mom. Now, some of you might be saying to yourselves, how can she have a baby and not want to be a mom? That makes her a horrible person. Well, no, it doesn't. Actually, to remember, we got to check our biases. New moms are often overwhelmed and exhausted, and it is typical for them to say, what have I done? Why am I doing this? Do I really want to do this? That is something that happens to a lot of parents. And those mothers and fathers usually have some type of support system. But Zula right now does not have a support system that we know of. She has financial issues, making it very difficult to take care of her child. She does not have high quality daycare. So she's having a really hard time being a mother right now. And so she's questioning whether or not she wants to be a mom. Okay. Now realize that the presenting problem is not, should she put this baby up for adoption? That would again show some bias, because that is not on the table from Zula. That is not what Zula was talking about. She just is questioning being a mom. So putting Savannah up for adoption is not part of the issue. The next section, again, 1 to 2 sentences, will be cultural considerations. Zula is white, has low socioeconomic status, and is a single mom. All of these contribute to where she is in terms of the resources available to her, how society treats her, and what her life is like, and the barriers that she faces. So those for her. Or the privilege that she has because she is white, right? So we have to think about that. Cultural considerations help us understand everything going on with the client. The next section is ethical considerations. So with Zula, the ethical considerations, there are many, but I'm going to give you 2 because I'm not expecting paragraphs and paragraphs, right? You might find others, and that's totally fine. But one is there's confidentiality issues with the doctor who referred her, right? Because the doctor referred her and may want to call and ask, how is she doing? What's going on? Is she taking better care of her baby? Et cetera, right? If the doctor wants to know how many sessions Zula has gone to, I can do that. If Zula signs a disclosure form for me and for the doctor, we each have to have separate disclosure forms, believe it or not, so that we have Zula's permission to talk. But I still would not go into deep detail with the doctor about what we talk about in session, because that would violate Zula's confidentiality in a way that maybe she would not understand, in terms of, like, she would not be able to, without understanding counseling very well, limit that to me when we discuss it. She might not understand that when she signs the disclosure form that the doctor might ask me these questions. So I will specifically ask Zula, what types of information, I would ask any client, what types of information would you like me to disclose? So confidentiality with the doctor who referred her. The second is anytime you have a minor, even though the baby is not the client, the welfare of the baby has to be considered. So the baby currently is not failure to thrive, so there's no intervention needed. I don't need to report anything, but I will check on the baby and see how the baby's doing through Zula's eyes anyway, as we continue in counseling. All right, so we're going to do the overall conceptualization through attachment theory, right? The PowerPoint has just the basics so that you understand where I'm coming from in terms of the pieces and parts of the theory that I'm using. But remember, what I'm about to do is several pages of writing. This is the largest part of the paper, and it needs to be the largest part of the discussion. All right. So Zula had many caregivers over before 5 and over time after that changed often because her mother worked a lot, right? I want to check your biases here on this because Zula was not neglected. She had people watching over her and caring for her. But when you're working 2 jobs to pay rent, you have to have caregivers to take care of your children. And there isn't a lot of inexpensive high quality daycare out there. And so Zula and her brother had a lot of babysitters. But with a lack of money, it's very hard to pay for quality and consistent caregivers. So keeping a babysitter over a long period of time would be difficult if you can't pay a significant amount of money to do so. So don't blame her mother because she was out working. We're not going to play the blame game on this. This is just the facts. Zula had multiple caregivers over time and before age 5 because her mother worked a lot. She didn't see a lot of her mother. Okay, I'm going to discuss the stages of attachment in terms of the changes in caregivers for Zula. So the first stage is generally not affected because children at that age do not have a preference for a caregiver. So as long as she was fed and clothed and changed, then and picked up a little bit, then she probably would have been fine. Stage 2, however, the inconsistencies in her care would have made it difficult for her to begin to anticipate caregiver reactions, which is what you do in stage 2, right? Because everybody has different ideas about raising children. Everybody would have different rules on how they interacted with her. This would cause issues with attachment because she wouldn't be able to anticipate from one person to the next how they would react to her. Stage 3, when she's in stage 3, she would get used to, that's when you really get used to or anticipate how caregivers react to you and begin to start thinking about how to react to them, right? So the caregivers would change up so much that she wouldn't understand how the world works because the way the caregiver interacts with me is how all relationships work, technically, as a child. Right? This would begin to cause issues with attachment. She would begin to be more independent because she couldn't rely on others to be there consistently the way she expected from person to person or the way she needed from person to person. For stage 4, having multiple caregivers affected reciprocity because each one of them was different. What the reciprocity, the back and forth between the caregiver and Zula was different, and she was not able to anticipate how that other human would react. So I hand you a telephone, you say hello. One caregiver might say hello. One caregiver might say, I'm not playing with that. One caregiver might be too busy to even pay attention that she's holding the telephone out. So there was no consistency in how she was reacted to in reciprocity. Right? So because of this, she had disrupted attachments in stage 4. Continuing with the conceptualization, I'm going to talk about those disrupted attachments because that's part of the theory. She had multiple caregivers, but she also had disrupted attachments throughout her childhood because she was separated from her mother and she was separated from her brother, who I believe was, based on what we're saying, because she caregave, her brother was caregiver, was probably one of her primary attachments. And at 12, she was removed from her brother, right? So these different disruptions could have caused some trauma with Zula. The trauma then would cause anger issues, right? Getting into fights, lots of aggression, and not having long-term relationships because she didn't know how to make them work, right? She never had a long-term relationship with someone as a child. So the moment that she begins to trust, she gets afraid they're going to leave and she begins to back off or she does something to disrupt the relationship. These disrupted attachments also could have caused a lack of empathy. When she says things like, they should have listened to me, right? Because without the reciprocity in stage 4 and understanding the back and forth of how people we expect in our society to react to each other, she's not going to have empathy for other people. Okay. She did, however, I believe, have empathy for her brother because she took care of him, right? So I'm going to say that she has, as a child, she had an avoidant attachment. She had anger toward others. She had the aggression and lack of empathy. Make sure as you go through the case and you explain what you believe is happening, you also bring in examples like I've been doing from the case to be specific for the client. So as an adult, I'm continuing the conceptualization with attachment theory. As an adult, she has a lack of trust in others, as shown by her inability to have long-term relationships. If you think about her boyfriend, he said, she was very standoffish, right? He never really knew her. And she has high self-esteem. She's independent. She knows she can count on herself. She can't really count on other people based on her childhood and the things that happened to her and the disrupted attachments, because there wasn't any one person for a long period of time that she could trust. Okay? She knows she can take care of herself. She knows she can do things. She has goals. So she has higher self-esteem, but a lack of trust in others. Those two things cause what we consider a dismissing attachment as an adult from when you get to the readings. Okay. Because of those things, she has difficulty bonding with Savannah. Now, mom is having the difficulty, not the child. Mom has a difficulty bonding to the child. The child attaches to the mom, but Savannah is not our focus because Savannah is not our client, right? So we're only going to focus on our client. Okay, and we're not going to say things like she needs to be a better mom. That's not what we're talking about here. We're talking about what's going on with the client, and she's having difficulty bonding with her baby because she's never had a long-term relationship, and that affects how she reacts as a mother. Okay? Zula doesn't see this as an issue. But from the attachment theory perspective, it is important for her to bond to her baby and to provide consistent caregiving. And it's also important for her to trust others because that would create a more secure attachment rather than a dismissing attachment. Okay? So Zula has difficulty creating relationships because she backs off when she begins to trust. This disrupts her self-concept. When she begins to trust someone or thinks someone is going to be there for a while, it disrupts her view of how the world works. I can't trust others. I can't count on someone, right? And it disrupts her concept of self. So it causes her to end the relationship or to sabotage the relationship because she believes she needs to be, because of her life events, needs to be independent and not needing others. And she withdraws from relationships. And her idea is to teach this to her daughter because her life lesson, Zula's life lesson, was don't trust other people. And she believes that this is an important life lesson to tell her daughter from the get-go so that Savannah doesn't go through the trauma and heartbreak that she did. All right, so that's my overall conceptualization, all of these past few pieces, and that's several pages worth of writing, right? The explanation from the theory base is one sentence that takes everything that I've said previously in terms of the conceptualization and brings it down to one summary sentence, right? Remember that this issue might be a little bit different than the client's perceived issue, okay? So the explanation of the issue from the theory base for Zula is Zula has, because it's current and she's an adult, a dismissing attachment that is preventing her from bonding with her baby and preventing her from having a support system and relationships with others. All of the stuff that I talked about, this is like that gem that tells me what's going on with the client. And I will take this sentence and the other information from my conceptualization to create goals. So we need one long-term and one short-term goal for Zula. The long-term goal would be to increase Zula's trust in others from a 1 to a 5 to help her have a more secure attachment. Okay, very specific to Zula, right? She needs to have a more secure attachment. She has a dismissing attachment. And in order to have a secure attachment, she has to increase her trust in others. A short-term goal would be for Zula to learn 3 ways to bond with her baby to help her begin being consistent with Savannah so that she can then trust others. Okay, so the goals are measurable. They're about Zula. It's not about me teaching her 3 ways. It's about her learning 3 ways, right? And they're based on the conceptualization. Now, the techniques and methods come directly from the goals that we just discussed and the conceptualization. All right, so I'm going to choose 3. You have to do 3, right? The idea is, how are you going to help the client meet those goals? And remember, everything has to be specific to the client. So I want to be a safe base for Zula. That's lovely, and that's very attachment, right? But just saying that and leaving it there wouldn't be enough for a case conceptualization, because you need to tell me why. What is the purpose? Why should I use this with Zula? So my explanation would be, because Zula has never had someone who is consistent in her life and who she believes is trustworthy, I will make an extra effort to be consistent and empathetic and provide a safe base for Zula, regardless of how Zula reacts towards me, so that she can begin to trust others. Okay? Confrontation is a great technique. You could pretty much put it with any theory base and any client, right? I'm going to confront that client. But again, I have to explain why, specific to this client, and all of the things that we've talked about. Why is it important for me to use confrontation? So I would say I would use confrontation gently in the beginning of our relationship. When she minimizes something positive, especially in relation to others, because I want her to trust other people. And so if someone helps her, I don't want her to minimize that. I want her to recognize that. Right? And that will help her increase her trust in others. The third technique is inner child work. So I will use inner child work, specifically regression techniques, to work through past trauma of being sent away so that she is then able to trust others. Okay? So those are my techniques and methods. And everything, as you see, one thing depends on something else. So the techniques and methods depend on the goals and the conceptualization. The goals depend on the conceptualization. The conceptualization depends on the case and the theory base. And one thing leads to another. It's really important to have everything matching that way. That way you are consistent with your client. What you're going to work on with your client is consistent with how you see your client, and is consistent with the issues and what is going on with your client. If you have any questions about this particular conceptualization or other questions about conceptualization, go ahead and upload them to Canvas or email me.